Confusion and Anger by Alan Fashion. At the end of it, if you feel confused and angry, there is a shriveled old crone too ugly or too old for anyone to care about her, or there is a cynical old person. The shriveled old crone is bitter and twisted and doesn't feel proper affection for young people. Yet she influences them if they believe what she says. And she often tells them things that will get them into trouble because she hates them for being young and good looking. She may get away with it, but not always. And she probably does really care a bit for the young people that she does it to, that she wouldn't really want anything very bad to happen to them. When anyone asks her to explain it on the rare occasions that it is traced back to her, she will blame the young people for believing her. And she'll say something like, "Obviously I didn't really mean it myself." Alternatively, there is a cynical old person that expects everyone to understand that he's just being cynical and doesn't care about things he hears. But then people think that he does care about them, and that's why he's saying it. So you can't win. If you keep talking about something and reading about it, then nobody believes that you don't really care about it. Perhaps there is some truth in this. And a silly thing is that the cynical old person might really have thought that they didn't care about it for a time until it was pointed out to them. Perhaps, though, the only solution is not to talk about things at all, and no matter who you are. And definitely not to anyone who doesn't know as much as you do. Still, with the internet and paper and online newspapers sometimes over 60 pages long, everyone probably does know as much as anyone else. So why can't you talk about it? It is just maybe that nobody wants to hear your point of view. They have a different one. And nobody who is an adult could still possibly need to read a newspaper to be educated about politics or current affairs. So what's the reason to read a newspaper? It is just that if you didn't, then you wouldn't know anything that was going on in the world around you. But it is just not a good thing to talk about. This is despite the many hours every week that some people take getting the news. It seems they would like to recycle it to improve their social skills. And that's another silly thing. But then if you examine what people talk about, the main thing they talk about is controversy when discussing any subject. And this controversy is often politics right out of a newspaper. In fact, some people say that there is absolutely nothing you can discuss other than controversy. Yet, the silly thing is that people are often told you must never discuss any controversy of any kind. You mustn't when it is poor social skills. So what does that leave you to talk about? Often, it leaves people their work to talk about, or else, they talk about something like computers. This means they are either work or computer bores or both. Computers are only a word processor and spreadsheet, or at least that's what they were for years. But now you can watch television on them. Alternatively, you can read a novel on them. So it seems that it is a safe subject to talk about for many people. Perhaps, it avoids having to say what was actually in the television program or in the novel. But ultimately, anyone they say it to will find it boring unless they are also a computer bore. Really, it depends on your friends. So who really wants to know this stuff? And why would they want to know it? Perhaps nobody wants to hear about computers because at some level it is always boring or inappropriate. So that's another silly thing. Yet computers help some people. They are used to communicate all sorts of ideas. All of this is done with basic software such as word processors and spreadsheets. Everyone uses this basic software. And maybe the cynical old man and the shriveled old crone were only talking for the sake of talking. And that is just a silly thing that people have to say something when they might at times be criticized for it. Unless that is, you avoid controversial issues you really can't talk about. Perhaps, some things are always bad things to say. Or, at least, this is true for most people about some subjects. Try to think what these things are that, in fact, you should never say. Really, you know what they are, don't you? Silly, isn't it, if you ever said anything about them when really you did know? There are two more silly things. That you know a lot about things from reading the newspapers that you really should never say is one. And second, that possibly for years you've skipped any articles in a newspaper that were not controversial as not being important. But that is assuming anything in a newspaper isn't controversial. Perhaps do something silly like buy yet another newspaper tomorrow and look next time to see if anything is controversial. Also, you could look to see if things are not explained fully. Possibly, you can read something that is not controversial. But once you understand the controversy around it, then it is controversial no longer. Perhaps, though, there really is some other reason to read it. The end.